Good morning, Mr. Scirotto, Larry Scirotto. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you.
Good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I come from Pittsburgh, 25-year veteran in law enforcement. I spent my majority of my career with the city of Pittsburgh. I retired in 2018 as the Assistant Chief of Professional Standards. And in that time, I oversaw our training and development, our policy, our internal affairs division, and parts of the national initiative strategy and our intelligence units. So I've had an opportunity to be a part of or involved in or oversight of pretty much every department we've had in the organization. So my experience within our profession is pretty vast, and now it leads me here. I hope to have an opportunity to lead the Metro Nashville Police Department.
From what you've seen, heard about the Nashville Police Department, what aspects of it would you seek to change if you were named police chief?
You know, when we talk about reimagining policing, a lot of people go to defunding policing. And when I think about reimagining policing, I think about being innovative in the way in which we deliver services to the community, and the way we engage our communities. And when I say our communities, I mean all of our communities, communities of color, the LGBTQ community, mental health community, that we don't exclude or leave anyone out. So when I think of how and what I would change about the MNPD, maybe not even so much change, but be assured that we are a transparent organization, that we're accountable to ourselves and the communities in which we represent, and that we move from a warrior mindset to that of a guardian, and how important it is to be a guardian within our communities for the citizens we serve. I believe that MNPD should work toward being a procedurally just organization and take steps further than they already have to move toward that objective, whether we're talking about building trust and legitimacy with communities, whether we're talking about technology, social media, policy development. When we're speaking about community engagement and crime reduction, we're talking about empowering our communities that with their own collaborative strategies for crime prevention and reduction, and engaging them in a meaningful partnership that isn't a matter of convenience, right? And isn't it gives us an opportunity, okay, right? An opportunity to engage in a meaningful way with those that may oftentimes haven't in the past been engaged, involved, or even have their input heard, isn't how they want policing strategies to work in their neighborhoods. And I think that is an objective for not only MNPD, but law enforcement nationally. And what better place to start than here and become the national model for those to emulate, and flattery or mocking is the best form of flattery, right? And allow other organizations to see what we do here, how we transform an organization to become true community police partners.
Okay. Could you talk a little bit about past experiences with organizational cultural change and strategic planning, and how would you draw on those experiences to make our police department better?
So when you think about the sustainable partnerships, and in essence, I start out with we can do better. We should do better for our communities. We should do better for our organization. And how do you build sustainable partnerships, right? Start with philosophical changes in the way we police community of color, in the way we engage, in the way we develop strategic planning, that I always refer to Sir Robert Peel, who in 1829 comes with these 9 fundamental principles of law enforcement, and number 7 being maybe one of the most significant that we still 200 years later don't get all that right, is that the public are the police and the police are the public. And when we're talking about sustainable relationships, we're talking about trust, and not the trust that I have in whether you're going to take something from me. So trust that you care to keep me safe, and that's a grassroots, boots on the ground, everyday proposition and everyday effort that can never be taken for granted, right? And when want to build sustainable relationships, we engage our faith-based community. We engage our community of color. We engage our organization internally and again, seek input from within. That we don't leave any stone unturned as we develop this strategy to be a more inclusive police organization.
You're talking about being inclusive. Nashville's police department, sworn officers now, currently 73.6% white men. When you look at white women, it goes up to 81%. What is your thinking about diversity, inclusion, equity? And how would you seek to change the makeup of Nashville's police department?
So as a black man in a blue profession, I'm acutely aware of how our organization's dynamics affect the way that we are perceived within the community. I believe that a diverse organization is a just organization, which in the community's eyes will be a legitimate organization. And first and foremost, when you're talking about recruiting and retention, you must look within, right? So to those statistics, we think 5% of the command team, right? 5% of the command team are women, right? And then 18% of the command team are people of color. And when you're outward looking in for a career that you want to engage in, you want to be a part of, you look at the senior leadership. And in this department, senior leadership doesn't reflect the community, which then in turn oftentimes translates to senior leadership doesn't reflect the organization, and now the organization doesn't reflect the community. So you have to be intentional about hiring with diversity. Those people that are in power positions have the opportunity and ability to hire, must, when presented with that opportunity, hire with diversity in mind. I am proud of the work we did in Pittsburgh. When I left our organization, our command team, our leadership team was 65% minority. Of the 17 members of that team, we had 4 members of the LGBTQ community, we had 7 women, and we had 4 ethnic minorities. And that diversity permeated through our organization. From 2015 to 2018, we increased our minority recruiting to 36% organizationally, and 22% of those were ethnic minorities. From a time prior that was very similar to where Nashville is, 11%, 10%, unacceptable levels if you're talking about legitimacy within your community, if you're talking about building a department that is reflective of the communities that we serve. I think we have to be, it's unique that about every 2 years, Nashville media talks about the lack of diversity in MNPD. 2014, there's a story. 2016, there's a story. 2018, there's a story. And now 2020, here we are again with the same story. And it's the same challenges, and maybe oftentimes the same excuses that we're working hard toward minority recruitment, that it's not easy to get minorities to apply into law enforcement in this community, that if you're a minority and you have options, law enforcement may not be the one you want. And to me, I find them to be excuses. The reality is, if you're not intentional and you're not proactive and you don't look at what policies prevent minority applicants from even applying or excludes them, if you don't have an inclusive organization that women feel welcomed working in, then all those excuses become valid because you just won't get the applicant pool. The reality is we have an obligation and as leaders, as administrators, to ensure that we are removing those obstacles that serve to hold or withhold minorities from joining our organization.
So what do you do? What do you do to get people who are not applying today, to get them to apply for jobs within the police department, and especially as field officers?
So you recognize that every officer in this organization, from the chief to the newest hire, is an ambassador for our police department. And we develop regional recruiting plans that focus on Nashville and Nashville Metro. I mean, there are 2 million people within this geographic region that can be a focus of our efforts. We have our universities, whether it be Tennessee State, Belmont, Vanderbilt, our faith-based groups that are supporting supporting our cause, that are engaged, that serve as a conduit for access, that we make ourselves available to the minority communities, whether it be holding a job day for women, or going to our local high schools and colleges and providing preparation for the civil service exam, that we take affirmative steps to engage early and often. And then that we work on ourselves within, that we work on that leadership piece where the diversity we say we seek, that our leadership team mirrors. And when it doesn't, you make sure that it does, and you promote the diversity as an intention. And you don't rely on excuses of why people won't apply. I'm not an excuse person. I'm a solutions person. So don't come to me with excuses. Come to me with solutions. And they're not applying isn't a solution. It's an excuse.
Or not applying, or we can't find
We
it.
can't. I can find them for you. I promise. And then you hold me, my administration, accountable to that diversity benchmark. That in 2 years from today, I don't get to use the excuse they're just not available. I couldn't find people of color to apply. I couldn't find women to apply. I didn't make my leadership team. I didn't seek to diversify my leadership team. Think about the divergent thought you bring to the organization just by bringing in people with different mindsets, different backgrounds. And I think when you think about diversity within an organization, when you go outside of your region, I'm talking about people that are value aligned with the city of Nashville, that grew up here, that have vested interest in the health and well-being of not only this community, but their families, their businesses, their friends. And that's how you recruit with intention, in my opinion.
Okay. What tools do you think are effective that would help ensure that police officers can communicate with people who are with non-English speaking people?
So first and foremost, you have to have a strong cultural diversity program. And that is from the academy to in-service, that speaks to the differences of our community. Think about this, that Nashville over the last 10 years has, of all of the new population growth, 12% are foreign-born and come from Afghanistan, come from Bhutan, come from Kurdish, right? It's Kurdistan. So that number is continuing to increase. You have a Bhutanese community of 60,000 people in Nashville as a primary refugee relocation. And so how do you ensure that you are a police department for all of your community? You develop a couple of things. The expectation that maybe your officers will be able to speak specific languages is a challenge, but it's not a challenge that you should turn away from. It's a challenge that you should accept and come up with a solution for. So what we did in Pittsburgh is we partnered with a city initiative as Welcoming Pittsburgh. And on their team, they had people that were able to speak specific languages that were relative to the communities that we were serving. We're fortunate enough to have a few officers that were from Bhutan and spoke that language. And so what we created was a grassroots program, again, to go to target that community, make ourselves available to that community, and create a community environment where they felt they were supported by, oftentimes in their countries, a police force that they don't trust, that we provided them with access to emergency call access if you needed us in an emergency. We provided them with non-essential service access if you needed us in non-emergency. What we did was we became a resource to a community that was much different from ours on a foreign land to them. And being a resource and providing access and then recruiting our officers from those communities then in turn legitimizes our organization and then provides a service to all of our community members, not just some.
Last year, the Metro Police Department used force 299 times. Of those, 181 involved black suspects. What's your approach? What would be your approach to the use of force? And you talk about your experiences in in reducing the use of force,
So
if there are any?
I have a few. So I think to this point, first, that think of foundational principles, and there's two, that the MNPD must recognize the sanctity of human life. And two, and it's my philosophy, is that our purpose and goal is to do no harm. And those are the foundations in which we exist. And then we go back to Sir Robert Peel, and there's two principles that speak to use of force. And one is that force should only be an option when the power of persuasion has failed and you have exhausted any other available option, right? And then the second is cooperation from the public diminishes greatly, tremendously, when they see our officers using force on their community. So how do you evaluate, engage, ensure that when we do use force, it's appropriate, it's absolutely necessary, and then more importantly, it's value aligned with the organization. And you retool, and what we did in Pittsburgh is we retooled our use of force strategy, our use of force training. We start with our use of force curriculum, building a team that is from rank and file, our civilian review, our internal affairs, Office of Municipal Investigations, and allowing that team to develop a strategy for how we would review force, how we would direct our officers in the application of force, and then reinforcing our curriculum that we do no harm. What did that mean? That meant that all policies were in line with national best practices. We took the guiding principles of force from the Police Executive Research Forum and incorporated all of those suggestions into our policy, right? And from there, we created a use of force review. How do you know you have a problem if you're not reviewing it on a regular basis? If it becomes only when there's a critical incident that occurs, or only when there's an officer-involved shooting that occurs. We review every use of force with our use of force team that specializes in that product with those three principles in mind. Is it legal? Is it within policy? And does it reflect our values? And when that doesn't happen, then we take corrective action. And corrective action doesn't always result in discipline. Corrective action is training and education. Corrective action may be a revision in how we wrote it, or a revision of how we taught it. But we were certain to always review all force within our organization to ensure that they aligned with our values. And how do you minimize force? De-escalation is what the buzzword of our profession for the last 5 years has been all about. And what does it mean? Some people may not even be able to give you a definition of what de-escalation techniques are. It's about using your words and your mind to avoid having to use force. And recognizing that time is on your side. We are not against the clock here. We have the ability to use time as a benefit and potentially and most likely reduce force. We create and train and educate a tactically competent officer. And when I say tactically competent, it's not the rifles and SWAT gear. It's that our officers leave our training prepared to minimize the unnecessary use of force, prepared to engage in a dialogue that minimizes force and de-escalates situations instead of running themselves into situations, that once they're tactically competent and they are best trained, which is an investment on behalf of the organization, then they are less likely to use force. And then there's another layer that's about critical incident review, and not our own critical incident review, but critical incident review of other organizations. Philadelphia just had an officer-involved shooting with a man with a knife, and that tragic situation resulted in his death. MNPD the following morning should be reviewing the circumstances of that shooting, and then evaluating the circumstances of that shooting, from at least from what you know, to ensure that our organization is trained, acting, educated appropriately, so that we may avoid that situation. We added less lethal use of force options to all patrol. All patrol. We engaged in crisis intervention training for all of our patrol officers, and not a 8-hour course. This is a 40-hour investment of certification course that our officers go through to be able to de-escalate situations that arise from mental health. And it also serves to de-escalate situations that, to be quite honest, when we're in crises, it is a mental health problem, whether you have a mental health disease. And to be able to actively and positively end those disputes with a peaceful resolution, and in that peaceful resolution being arrest without incident, right, then we've won.
2 years ago, Nashville voters created one of the strongest community oversight boards in the country. What would be your approach to dealing with the community oversight board, as well as recently the mayor appointed a police and policy commission, and then you have organizations such as NOAA. What would be your? How would you just not pay any attention to those organizations or close your ears to them? What would you do?
I came from Pittsburgh, and we had 2 civilian oversight boards. So, in essence, I don't know another way. We had the Office of Municipal Investigations, and then we had the Civilian Review Board, and both of those are independent of the police department. They are led by civilians, and one reports to the law department within the city, and one reports to the voters, and they are actively involved in all police decision making, as they should be. That should be no different than here in Nashville. So I commit on my first day at MNPD to make it available to hopefully engage in a collaborative process with you and the COB, and ensure that you are part of our leadership team, and that when we're talking about policy development, when we're talking about training and education, when we're talking about strategic initiatives that affect our communities, that you have a seat at the table, that this oversight isn't combative, that this oversight is collaborative, that when the PPC is engaged from the beginning of our policy development and our strategic initiatives, that it empowers our organization to be more transparent with the community, more accountable to the community, and that there's not a reason that anyone can suggest to me that when we have a demand from the community and we have a charge from the mayor's office to remove our silos, to take away all of those obstacles that continue to keep police apart and separate from the communities, that we don't seek that as an opportunity to grow, that we don't seek the input of the COB and Ms. Fitchard and how her constituents are and what they're providing her as a directive to the police department and its level of service.
So how do you get your officers to buy into that policy?
From the top to the bottom, from the executive leadership team. When we talk about community policing partnerships, it's exactly what it is. And talk about Sir Robert Peel's 7th principle, that the public are the police and the police are the public. There is no harm in engaging our communities and allowing our communities into our processes. There obviously are contractual issues that, relative to discipline, that they may be excluded, or sensitive criminal intelligence information that the community is excluded from for obvious reasons. But when we're talking about policy, deliverables of service, training and education, the organization's operation, there shouldn't be an aspect that the community isn't or doesn't have awareness of. This broadcast, why wouldn't I broadcast a leadership team meeting, a command staff meeting, an executive meeting, if I don't have any concerns about the motives of my organization, then I am beyond willing to be transparent about how we operate. And then I invite community input. I invite your engagement and your knowledge, and I respect the COB's position and role that they have within the community. And to do so, then you have an obligation and responsibility to ensure that they're an active participant in your leadership team.
And so, to add a little more, how do you build those relationships, sustainable relationships, partnerships with those communities in a town, say in Nashville, that have little trust in the police? What do you do to build those relationships? To get them to say, well, they're my guardians, they're not coming to get rid of me, or what do you do? How do you build relationships?
You start, my office is in the street. My office is in our neighborhoods. You don't legislate from the comforts of headquarters. And you pass that same directive and that same charge to the rest of your leadership team. And they're passing those same directives and charges to their officers in the street. And how do you build this community police partnership? It is, again, back to maybe the first question, it's boots on the ground, making relationships, shaking hands or elbow bumping in current times, looking another person in the eye and getting to know them. Far too often we get into a concept of drive-by policing where our officers aren't engaging in any meaningful way, and oftentimes when they are showing up, it's in times of crisis. And if we are intentional on the front end in engaging our communities before times of crisis, then maybe we're lucky enough to withstand them when they do occur, and everybody benefits from that. So you engage, we started in Pittsburgh, we engage the faith-based community as an active member of our leadership team. We engaged a community group, BPEP, the Black Political Empowerment Project. We engaged Health and Human Services in every aspect of what we did, community groups in every aspect of what we did. The national initiative picked 6 cities in America for a reason, and it was because we were willing to expose our organization, open up our doors, and remove our silos, take those obstacles away that prevented community involvement. If I'm a public servant and service to others is my #1 objective, then we should be willing to take that input. Community surveys are important. How do we know where to even start if we don't have a baseline of what the community thinks of the services we've been providing up to this point? And you start there, and you continue that engagement. This is a heavy lift. Being a police chief in a major city, being a police chief in any city in America, is not for the weak. This is going to take all of my effort and energy. This will take all of my leadership team's effort and energy. And in turn, it takes all of our officers' effort and energy to do it the right way, to do better.
All right. You touched on it a little earlier, but could you expand on what role would you develop for the police department in relation to individuals with mental illness or in mental health crisis?
So it goes back to our crisis intervention training, and that we prepare our officers to be able to engage in a tactically competent way that doesn't aggravate situations, and that their expertise and experience in this training will lead them to direct someone in mental crisis to the appropriate help and allow them the resources to get better without being put into the criminal justice system. So when we talk about what we did in Pittsburgh, the city had several initiatives, but one of them was the Big Bird initiative, and that dealt with, it was a app that we provided to our officers that they were able to give someone in crises, whether it be mental health, homeless, options, resources to remedy that situation. When we talk about, I'm a advocate for a co-responder program in Nashville that calls that have an obvious mental health component receive mental health trained officers and mental health trained professionals. And that doesn't start overnight. That goes back to what we did in Pittsburgh in engaging our mental health community to be a partner with us and not aside from us or an after the fact outcome, that they were responding with us to calls. And then here to make that a matter of practice. When you have calls like that, that we're sending the appropriate resources, because let's be clear, it's been shown time after time across the country, it's over the last year or two that police officers aren't that well equipped to deal with those type of calls. So why would we continue to put them at a disadvantage and expect there to be a different outcome? We have an obligation in this moment to provide the resources that they need and the resources that our communities need to resolve these issues of mental health, mental illness, in a nonviolent, helpful way to the person that we're here to assist.
All right. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
And good luck to you.
Thank you. I appreciate
All right.
it.
Good.